There's a rise in anti-foreigner sentiment in Japan. Japan is anti-immigration and xenophobic. At least that's what the mainstream news headlines and narrative would have you believe. But is that really true? The global rise in anti-immigration sentiment is unmistakable, from the US to the UK and Europe to even South Korea. Both the pro and anti-immigration sides claim to have facts and truth on their side. Japan appears to be no exception. You can find YouTube and TikTok videos of street demonstrations in Tokyo and political parties campaigning on Japan First platforms. Oh, and did you know that Japan just elected its first female prime minister, whose hardline stance on immigration control is winning her a 78% approval rating, as well as praise and support from President Trump? Here's a story that caught my attention. In October 2025, residents of Kuchan, a small but world-famous ski resort town in Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost prefecture, launched a petition with 4,000 signatures to block the construction of a foreign worker dormitory. The proposed facility would house 1,200 seasonal workers, most of them foreigners from Southeast Asia, who are needed to run the ski resorts and construction sites. Residents cited concerns about noise, garbage, and nighttime safety. One petition organizer said that she felt as if they were becoming foreigners in their own town. After all, 1,200 workers would be 10% of the town's entire population in a single complex. But here's what's interesting. The same town has been struggling with closed shops and an aging population for years. The local convenience store can barely stay open because there aren't enough workers. So you have this fascinating contradiction. Locals protesting the foreign workers who are needed to serve the foreign tourists whose money keeps their town alive. There is no denying that Japan is very different from Western countries like the US. It's an extremely homogeneous society with over 97% ethnically Japanese. And it's historically been a very closed-off country, which we will get into in a bit. But setting all the emotions and politics aside, we decided to do our own research to share to the best of our knowledge what Japan's immigration policy is actually like. By the end of this video, hopefully you can form your own opinion on Japan's approach to immigration. Of course, this requires us to go beyond the headlines and get into the nuances because, believe it or not, there are crucial differences between legal immigration and illegal immigration, as well as between highly skilled workers and low-skilled laborers. What about temporary work visas versus permanent residency? We need to get into all that because this is unfolding right before our eyes, while ordinary Japanese citizens are dealing with rising costs, a housing crisis, and the reality that their country is losing around 900,000 Japanese nationals every year. 16 consecutive years of population decline. Let's dive right in. First of all, how Japan ended up becoming so isolated is actually pretty fascinating. And until we did our research, we didn't even realize it had everything that would make for one crazy streaming show. Samurai, Christianity, civil war, and massacre. Turns out, there actually was a show out there called Shogun. The main character, John Blackthorne, is an English navigator who shipwrecks in Japan in the year 1600 and eventually becomes a samurai. That character was based on a real person, William Adams, the first and only Englishman to ever achieve samurai rank. So from a historical perspective, there was a time when Japan was open-minded about foreigners and eager to learn from them. But to understand how someone like William Adams could even reach Japan in the first place, we need to go back even further. We have to rewind 482 years, before the United States even existed. By the way, while I was watching Shogun, it got me thinking, what if there was a way to actually learn Japanese super fast just by watching my favorite shows? It turns out there is. Because if you're serious about working, doing business, or settling long-term in Japan, learning Japanese isn't really optional, right? It's a must. That's why we decided to partner with Migaku, a language learning platform that lets you learn Japanese from what you already watch on YouTube, Netflix, Disney+, basically anywhere. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm terrible at memorizing boring textbook phrases. So I was like blown away when with just one click, Migaku could turn any subtitle line into a smart flashcard that shows the word in full context, along with a native pronunciation, a visual reference from the exact scene, and everything else you need to remember it effortlessly. Migaku uses AI to personalize your learning with adaptive exercises by recommending content that matches your level. And if you prefer more structure, their complete Japanese courses walk you through everything step by step, covering hiragana, katakana, making it perfect for learners from beginner to advanced. What's so cool is that they even ditched the polite first approach, so you learn the real Japanese that natives actually speak. And even on your phone, you can snap photos of signs, menus, or Japanese websites and instantly turn them into study material. It's really an entire Japanese learning ecosystem. I ended up liking Migaku so much that I asked them to offer our viewers an exclusive deal, and they agreed. You can now get 50% off the lifetime plan or an extra free month on their standard and early access plans. And if you've ever wanted to learn other Asian languages, Migaku also supports Korean, Mandarin, and many other languages, all of which you can access with a single Migaku subscription. So be sure to take advantage of their discount offer. All right, let's get back to the deep dive. On September 23, 1543, a typhoon struck off the coast of southern Japan. 3 Portuguese merchants were aboard a trading ship that got caught in the typhoon, blown off course, and crash-landed at Tanegashima Island. When they stumbled off the ship, half dead, the local warlord came down to the shore to see what the hell was going on. These foreigners looked completely different from anyone he had seen. Tall, bearded, strange clothing. But what really caught his attention were the 2 long metal tubes they were carrying. They were called matchlock guns, and they could spit fire and kill somebody from a distance. And he, or anyone else in Japan for that matter, had never seen anything like it. Within days, the local warlord bought both guns for what sources describe as an astronomical sum. Some sources claim as much as 80 pounds of pure silver, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's purchasing power. He immediately ordered his swordsmiths to reverse engineer them, and within a year, Japan was producing its own firearms. This moment, this accidental arrival of the Portuguese merchants, were Japan's first ever recorded contact with Europeans. And it opened the door for what came next, a Portuguese trading network that would bring even more merchants and eventually missionaries. About 6 years later, on August 15, 1549, a Spanish priest named Francis Xavier stepped off a Portuguese ship on Kagoshima, a port city in southern Japan. He had heard about this mysterious country from a fugitive Japanese samurai he met in Malacca, a Portuguese trading port in what is now Malaysia, and he was convinced that Japan was ready for Christianity. And his intuition was correct. Within his first year, Javier succeeded in converting about 100 Japanese to Christianity, laying the groundwork for Japan's earliest Christian community. By 1551, the first church in Japan was built. By the time Javier left Japan after 2 years, he had baptized several hundred new believers, a remarkable foundation for a movement that would eventually grow to as many as 300,000 Japanese Christians by the year 1600. Even local warlords were rolling out the red carpet for him, but not because they cared about Christianity. It was because Portuguese merchant ships usually followed Catholic missionaries, and where there are ships, there's trade money. But here's where things started to get a little awkward, to say the least. Christianity clashed with pretty much everything Japan was founded upon at the time. No ancestor worship. That was unthinkable in a society where traditions revolved around honoring one's ancestors. Saying things like, everyone is equal before God, that was a direct threat to the social hierarchy where everyone had their place, from peasants to samurai to the lords at the top. And putting God above your feudal lord, that was straight up treason. The same warlords who welcomed Christianity for the trade benefits suddenly realized that this religion could upend their entire power structure. In 1614, the second shogun, the Japanese word for military ruler, officially banned Christianity. ordering all foreign priests to leave or face execution. Japanese Christians were forced to renounce their faith or face death. Fast forward to 1637, Tokugawa Iemitsu, the third shogun, was now in power, and the crackdown got even more brutal in the Shimabara Peninsula, which had a large underground Christian population. The local lord, with full backing from the shogun, was not only hunting down Christians and torturing them publicly. We're talking about crucifixion, suspension of boiling springs, water torture, but also imposing crushing taxes on peasants to fund his new castle. On top of that, the region was hit by famine and people were starving and desperate. So desperate, in fact, that in October 1637, they murdered a tax collector sent by the local lord. That was the breaking point. With nothing left to lose, roughly 37,000 people, consisting of peasants, masterless samurai called ronin, and entire Christian families, rose up in open rebellion. They seized an abandoned castle called Hara, repaired it, and fortified it. Their leader was an 18-year-old kid named Amakusa Shiro, described as a charismatic prophet with supposed miraculous powers. The shogun's initial forces, thousands of trained samurai, were defeated by rebels holed up in that fortress. Even though these rebels were peasants led by experienced, masterless samurai, how could they overcome professional warriors? Shocked and humiliated, Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu mobilized 125,000 troops, essentially his entire military, to surround one castle. He even called in his Dutch allies to bombard the fortress from the sea with naval cannons. The siege lasted 4 months. By the end, the rebels were starving, surviving on seaweed scraped from rocks below the castle walls. On April 12, 1638, the shogun's army launched a final overwhelming assault. The castle fell in one day. All 37,000 people inside, men, women, children, elderly, were hunted down and beheaded. Not a single person inside the castle were allowed to surrender. Their 18-year-old leader, Amakusa Shiro's body, was found among the corpses, and his head was cut off and displayed on a pike in Nagasaki as a warning to anyone who dared to defy the shogun. It was the moment when public Christianity in Japan was crushed, forced underground, with believers facing decades of secrecy and persecution. 1 year later, in 1639, Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu issued a decree called Sakoku, the closed country policy, that would seal Japan off from the world. The rules were absolute. All Portuguese were expelled immediately. All foreign books were banned except those the government allowed through Dutch and Chinese traders. Only one trade port remained open, Nagasaki, where Dutch and Chinese merchants were confined to a tiny island and carefully supervised. For 214 years, from 1639 to 1853, Japan was virtually cut off from the outside world. No Japanese could leave. No foreigners could enter. During this era, the United States was founded. The French Revolution happened. The Industrial Revolution transformed Europe. But in Japan, almost no one outside the ruling elite knew these events were even taking place. By 1853, when 4 massive US warships powered by steam engines arrived in Edo Bay, Japan had been isolated for longer than the United States had even existed as a country. By the way, the Japanese were absolutely terrified because they had never seen modern Western military technology. Commodore Matthew Perry of the US Navy delivered a letter from President Fillmore demanding that Japan open its ports to American ships under threat of military force, and gave Japan 1 year to respond. In February 1854, Perry returned to Japan a full month earlier than promised, and this time with 8 warships. Faced with overwhelming American power, Japan had no choice but to sign the Convention of Kanagawa, opening 2 ports to American ships. It signaled the end of Japan's 214 years closed country policy. So you can't fully appreciate Japan's immigration policy without understanding why they closed the doors in the first place. And now you know. The reason why Japan today is 97% ethnically Japanese is a direct result of policy decisions made 400 years ago to ward off foreign religion that could destabilize their feudal system. So what do you think 214 years of isolation can do to Japan's sense of identity? And what happens when that identity is under threat? That's what we're going to explore next. So, is Japan really anti-immigration? Well, that depends on how you define the term immigration, because the devil's in the details. Broadly speaking, immigration could mean either legal or illegal immigration. And it does appear that Japan is tightening policies on the illegal portion. But the question is, what even counts as illegal immigration in the Japanese context? In the case of the United States, the definition of illegal immigration is relatively straightforward. It's geographically possible for people from Mexico to cross the US-Mexico border without going through an authorized port of entry. While stricter border enforcement under President Trump has made this far more difficult in recent years, the act of entering the US itself is what makes someone illegal under 8 US Code Section 1325A, which states, any alien who enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place, other than as designated by immigration officers, shall be fined or imprisoned not more than 6 months or both. In other words, if you cross the US border outside of an official port of entry, you've committed a federal misdemeanor for a first offense, and any subsequent illegal re-entry after deportation is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. The Center for Immigration Studies estimates that there are over 15 million unauthorized immigrants as of January 2025, which represents roughly 4.6% of a total US population of approximately 347 million. This includes both people who cross the US border illegally and those who overstay their visas in the US. But Japan is fundamentally different. As an island nation, you cannot just walk across a border into Japan, right? You either have to fly in or arrive by boat. So the vast majority of Japan's illegal migrants are gaikokujin, or foreign nationals, who initially came on tourist visas, student visas, or work visas legally and then overstayed. As of July 2025, there are approximately 71,000 illegal overstayers in Japan. Over 43,000 of them entered as short-term tourists, meaning they came to Japan for vacation and just never left. Another 10,000 or so were technical interns, people who came through Japan's technical intern training program, working in manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and textiles, and then decided to stay beyond their visa expiration date. Then there are over 7,000 people holding what Japan calls designated activities visas, working holiday visa holders, internship participants, etc. You get the picture, right? So where are these people from? Vietnam tops the list with over 13,000 people, and then Thailand, South Korea, and China. Now, in terms of the actual percentage, these 71,000 illegal overstayers represent just 0.058% out of Japan's total population of 123 million. That's just a drop in the bucket. Less than 1/10 of 1%. Compare that to the 4.6% of unauthorized immigrants in the United States. Japan really does not have an illegal immigration problem. Yet somehow, the current Japanese government is pursuing what may be the most aggressive crackdown on immigration, both illegal and legal, in years. In October 2025, Japan elected its first female prime minister, Sanae Takaichi. But if you thought a historic first female leader moment would bring progressive change to Japan's immigration system, think again. As a leader of Japan's ruling Conservative Party, her entire platform centered around conservative nationalism, return Japan to traditional values, crack down on immigration, strengthen the military, and revive the economy. But what's interesting is that her crackdown isn't just about 71,000 illegal overstayers. It's about all 3.95 million foreign residents living in Japan, most of whom are there legally. But why target legal foreign residents? Now we are getting into a real gray area. loopholes in the system that appear legal on the surface but have been systematically exploited for years. You see, in the fiscal year ending March 2025, legal foreign residents pay just 49.7% of the required pension contributions, less than half. When it comes to health insurance premiums, they paid only 63%. Compare that to the overall payment rate in Japan, including Japanese nationals, which sits at 93%. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated, so let me see if I can break this down. Japan has two different pension systems. If you work for a company with 5 or more employees, you're automatically enrolled in the employee's pension and your contributions are automatically deducted from your paycheck every month. 50% comes from your salary, 50% paid by your employer. So there's no way to cheat the system in that case. But many foreign workers, mainly from Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, who make up nearly a third of all foreign residents, work part-time jobs or for very small businesses with fewer than 5 employees. These companies aren't required to enroll workers in the automatic system. Instead, workers are supposed to enroll themselves in the national pension and pay a bill that arrives in the mail every month. The problem is, some don't understand the Japanese language bill. Some move around frequently, so the bills get lost in the mail. Some deliberately ignore the bills because they need to send money back to their home country. Some figure, I'm leaving Japan in a few years anyway, why should I pay into a pension I will never be able to collect? To make matters worse, some small to medium-sized businesses, even those legally required to enroll workers in the employee's pension, deliberately misclassify foreign workers as independent contractors to avoid their requirement. Why? Because if workers are classified as independent contractors, the employer doesn't have to pay 50% of the pension contribution. And the worker, who now has to pay the full pension contribution themselves, often never does. Now, on top of all that, add Japan's outdated paper-based system to the mix. Japan still operates largely on cash, and many small to medium-sized businesses, particularly in construction, agriculture, and food services, pay foreign workers in cash under the table. No digital paper trail, no automatic tax withholding, no record for immigration authorities to check. You get paid cash, you send that cash home to Vietnam or the Philippines, and suddenly there is no record you ever earned that income in Japan in the first place. This means that in practice, the actual compliance rate for pension and health insurance contributions is probably even lower than the official 49.7% and 63% figures. The result is that Japanese taxpayers pretty much end up subsidizing a healthcare and pension system that part-time and small company foreign workers are underpaying into. The pension system is already strained by an aging population, and underpaying foreign residents only accelerates the problem. And ordinary Japanese citizens see this and think, wait a minute, we're following the rules. Why aren't they? That's the resentment the new Takaichi administration is tapping into. And starting in 2027, that's why her new policy will revoke visas for unpaid insurance and pension contributions. No payment, no visa renewal. Your permanent residency can be revoked too, depending on your payment history. For many Japanese voters, it finally feels like someone is making foreign residents play by the same rule as everyone else. Then there is the business manager visa issue that just became a hot button topic in local Japanese media. As of 2024, over 41,000 foreign nationals held what is called the business manager visa, which is a long-term visa designed for foreign entrepreneurs and investors who want to start or manage a business in Japan. Over half, about 21,000, were Chinese nationals. The process to get this visa is, or I should say used to be, quite simple if you have the money. You could register a company with 5 million yen, roughly $34,000 in capital, submit basic paperwork claiming you're planning to run a legitimate business, and get approved for a 5-year residency visa that's renewable. Now, once you have that visa, you can even access Japan's healthcare system for yourself and your family members. The problem is that the vast majority of these business visa holders aren't running real businesses at all. According to Japan's Immigration Services Agency, when they scrutinized 300 suspicious applications, 90% had no genuine business activities in Japan. They were essentially shell or paper companies with minimal or zero operations. Some registered as minbaku, short-term rental businesses like Airbnb, but never actually rented anything out. And these shell companies are buying up properties like crazy. In 2024, foreign investors poured 940 billion yen, or roughly $6.4 billion, into Tokyo real estate alone. This is one reason Tokyo's property prices have skyrocketed 64% in just 4 years. Foreign capital, particularly Chinese capital, is driving much of this surge. In the most prestigious neighborhoods like Minato, Shibuya, and Chiyoda, foreign buyers account for 20 to 40% of all new apartment purchases. Some individual developers report that over 50% of their luxury condo buyers are foreign. This is because in Japan, there are no restrictions on the percentage of foreign ownership like in China or Thailand. In fact, Japan is one of the most foreigner-friendly real estate markets in Asia. You don't even need to live in Japan or have residency to buy property, something almost unthinkable in neighboring countries. Now, these shell companies should be paying some taxes in Japan in theory, like annual property taxes and capital gains taxes when they eventually sell. But because many of them structure their investments through offshore corporate entities, they can legally extract profits back to China through clever structuring and loopholes while contributing pretty much nothing to the local economy or community. Basically, much of the wealth being created simply leaves Japan, while property prices remain crazy high. Imagine what this does to young Japanese workers and families in Tokyo who are completely priced out of their own neighborhoods. This is why the promise of crackdown by the Takaichi administration on foreign business visa holders and foreign land purchases resonated so much with voters. Following months of media coverage and public outrage, in October 2025, the Japanese government tightened the business manager visa requirements dramatically. As a result, an estimated 96% of current business manager visa holders would no longer qualify under the new rules. So, does this mean the end of fake companies under the business manager visa scheme? All we know is that in the weeks leading up to the October deadline, there was a surge in last-minute applications. In one widely reported incident, investigative reporters found that 49 Chinese companies were registered in a single Osaka building with no employees seen entering or exiting. But going forward, yes, shell companies should become much harder to maintain, but no one really knows for sure what other legal loopholes exist that could be taken advantage of. Ironically, however, the latest change to the business manager visa scheme is about to create potentially catastrophic consequences for Japan's future in ways that were totally unintended. How? Let's get into the next. So this is where the stereotype of Japan being anti-immigration really starts to fall apart. Yes, Japan is cracking down hard on visa overstayers and non-compliance violations, as we just covered. But when it comes to a certain group of foreigners, Japan is rolling out the red carpet. Top global talent looking to live and work in Japan. We're talking highly skilled professionals and entrepreneurs. This approach can be compared and contrasted to the well-known H-1B program in the US, which was created in the early 1990s to bring highly educated foreign professionals into the US workforce. The H-1B visa requires employer sponsorship, so sponsoring employers would have to pay legal fees, filing fees, and compliance costs that could total tens of thousands of dollars. But under President Trump, US employers must now pay an additional $100,000 fee for each new H-1B application. Now, Japan appears to be taking the completely opposite approach when it comes to bringing in global talent, at least on paper. First of all, Japan does not have a direct equivalent of the H-1B visa, but it does offer two primary pathways aimed at highly skilled professionals and business founders. One is the Highly Skilled Professional Visa, or HSP visa, and the other one is the Business Manager Visa. The HSP visa is probably the most similar to the US H-1B, and it's a point-based system using criteria like education, professional experience, income. If you meet a certain points threshold, you get an exceptionally fast track pathway to permanent residency. For example, if you reach 70 points, you can apply for permanent residency after just 3 years. If you reach 80 points, you can apply in just 1 year, an insanely fast track compared to the standard 10-year requirement for most other foreigners. This normally applies to professionals like AI engineers, researchers, and corporate executives. Oh, and by the way, the HSP visa fee is less than $50 and even with legal services, the total is under $1,500 in most cases. So at the very least, Japan appears to be super serious about attracting global talent that would make great highly skilled employees in Japan. Now, why did I emphasize the employee part? Because this becomes especially relevant to the whole business manager visa issue we can finally come back to. Remember how I mentioned in the previous chapter that there had been a ton of abuse with foreigners setting up fake companies in Japan under the business manager visa? The irony here is that the original intent behind the business manager visa was to attract global entrepreneurs who genuinely want to start companies in Japan. In other words, legitimately talented and driven founders who don't want to work in big Japanese companies as employees. Often, the smartest and most driven people just want to do their own thing and execute their own vision. So how will these changes impact foreign founders running Japanese startups? I actually interviewed an American founder who's been running a business in Japan for the past 6 years, and this is what he had to say.
Look at the point system for the entrepreneur specific, highly skilled professional visa. The first thing you notice is that it's very skewed towards the salary. And actually, to get any points on the salary, you have to have a minimum salary of about $100,000. I guess it's a little less with the exchange rate, and that's only to get a little bit, and it maxes out at about $250,000 salary. And if we're talking about startups here, me personally, I paid myself a zero salary for 3 years at Reiwa Pharmaceuticals until we got our first external investors. And so I think the clear result of this, or what's really going on behind the scenes, is that this highly skilled professional visa and the business manager visa that all of the buzz is going on about were actually never intended to be for startup companies. And then we've got this whole slew of new requirements that have been introduced about a month ago. And a lot of people don't even know the details. I've written down here the 5 major changes to make it even more strict, which is increasing the capital up to 30 million yen, so $250,000 that a startup has to come with. The founder now has to pass a Japanese proficiency exam at the N2 level. Okay, and in fact, I'm lucky because I was able to study Japanese. I have passed that exam, but I don't think that's the case for most international founders. And even that regulation alone is just shutting off the pipeline into Japan. In addition to that, you now have to have a master's degree in business or the specific field of study that the business is from to prove that you're competent. And how many times have we heard about the most successful companies being started by a college dropout, right? There's, and to say any startup starting in Japan must have a master's degree, I mean, this is just a recipe for failure. And then the other two on the list are that the business plan must be approved by someone in Japan. So you have to have a full Japanese business plan approved by an external party in Japan. And then the last new regulation, which I personally find to maybe be the most egregious, is the requirement of a full-time Japanese employee. All of these 5 requirements, including the full-time employee, need to be set up and active before you can even apply for this visa. So they're asking companies, potential startups, to already be established with full-time staff. And if you're not living in Japan when you have your idea, who are you going to hire? all that needs to happen to make this system easier would be establishing a new specific visa for startups, right? Make it points based that are from the ground, not based on salary, just totally formulated for startups and founders. And that's really what's got to happen. There's no other way.
Can you see now how, even with the best intentions, government efforts can fall short if they lack nuance in implementation? The resulting unintended consequences might not just drive out real talent, but also deter global talent from even applying for the visa in the first place. That still doesn't mean Japan is deliberately trying to be anti-immigration or hostile to highly skilled foreign workers in favor of domestic workers. If anything, it's the opposite. The real issue is poor execution. And that brings us to the next and final chapter. Because if we're going to address the whole anti-immigration perception, we first have to acknowledge the anti-foreigner sentiment, which is becoming increasingly visible in Japanese society. It may sound similar, but anti-foreigner isn't exactly the same as anti-immigration. Let's take a closer look. Since reopening borders for tourism after COVID-19, Japan has experienced an explosion of international tourism. Between January and September 2025, over 30 million foreign visitors poured into Japan, a 70.7% year-on-year increase. By the end of 2025, over 40 million tourists are expected to visit Japan. That's over 1/3 of the population visiting the country in a single year, and the sheer scale is triggering serious tensions. To be fair, there are real economic benefits. According to the Japan Tourism Agency, foreign visitors spent over $32 billion in the first half of 2025, powering local businesses and revitalizing the travel sector. But locals across the country, especially in tourist-heavy prefectures like Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, describe daily disruptions that cut to the core of Japanese values. Nearly 60% of residents now say their communities feel crowded or overwhelmed, and media stories detail the breakdown of everyday etiquette and cleanliness.
Any of this anti-foreigner sentiment that may be brewing in the background, I think the real problem has been this huge boom in over-tourism. I really believe that's the problem. And maybe the inability of the average Japanese person to parse between a tourist they see on the street and just an average foreign worker in the country. And our office is in Shibuya, and when you walk down to the main area, I mean, you barely hear people speaking Japanese, right? It's all tourists downtown these days. And I think when you've got this huge influx of especially tourists who are not familiar with the Japanese customs and a lifestyle, that's much more indicative of where the problem's coming from, in my opinion. There's a reason people love visiting Japan. There is a certain allure to this society where you walk downtown on the street, there's no trash, there's no homeless people. Everyone's acting so polite. You see everyone in a suit. There's something special going on in Japan with the public orderliness. But when Japanese people grow up in this society, it just becomes so ingrained in their mindset they almost can't even imagine a society with the grime, the dirtiness, the loudness. And when suddenly all of these tourists come in and just don't understand the daily habits, the daily style of Japanese people's life, of lifestyle and habits, I think there is a friction that's coming there, right? And it's even as simple as people yelling in the streets, people sitting on the ground in a train station. Something just simple like that. And I can tell you, Stephen, that I've talked to lots of local Japanese friends and businessmen about these recent political changes, especially for the business manager visa. And the response is usually, "Oh, I didn't know about that." Oh, is there a change for non-Japanese visas? Oh, I didn't even know about that. I mean, I think for the average Japanese person, this is not they're not even thinking about entrepreneurs and the struggles we're going through, right? The only thing they're thinking about is every day I'm seeing loud tourists bothering me and bothering my life, and I don't really like the direction that this society is heading. It's really that simple.
This growing anxiety and frustration has been politically capitalized on by Japan's far-right nationalist party, Senseito. But the way they framed it was clever. Instead of making it just about unruly tourist or public order, they spun it into an all-out campaign against immigration and globalism, running hard on Japan first ideals. In other words, all the anti-foreigner frustration from over-tourism somehow got morphed into an anti-immigration crusade to channel the worries of everyday Japanese people. People who honestly often cannot tell the difference between a tourist, a worker, or an immigrant, and probably don't even care that much. That's the irony. Most Japanese citizens are not political. The majority of them don't even watch the news. Voter turnout in the most recent House of Councilors election was just 58.5%, meaning almost half the country didn't vote, and lots of people don't follow particular parties or platforms. They're just not that interested. But the far-right nationalist Senseido Party spurned everyday discomfort into mainstream talking points about zero illegal immigrants, foreign crimes, and protecting Japanese spirit. So the traditionally dominant conservative party, the Liberal Democratic Party or LDP, felt compelled to shift its own platform further to the right to maintain power. They ended up embracing elements of Japan First rhetoric to build broader coalitions with the far right and managed to retain power in the recent elections, though by a slimmer margin. So do you get the whole picture now? The truth is, Japan's immigration policy is pretty much where it's always been. Despite the looming population crisis, at its core, policy has always been about maintaining national identity and values forged over 400 years of isolation. And this is reflected in the pathway to permanent residency and citizenship, which for anyone who isn't highly skilled professionals is extremely tough. You need a minimum of 10 years legal residence, including at least 5 consecutive years under a work visa, 5 years of stable employment, flawless tax and social insurance payment history, and 0 criminal record. You also have to show functional Japanese language ability, have a Japanese guarantor for your application, and provide proof of financial stability and demonstrate good moral conduct. Bear in mind, all these are just for getting permanent residency. Getting citizenship is even tougher, which I won't get into too much detail there. But once you somehow manage to become a Japanese citizen, you also have to renounce any other nationality since Japan doesn't allow dual citizenship. So yeah, that's one hell of a threshold, and it's always been that way. The bottom line is that ordinary hard-working Japanese people aren't xenophobic or anti-immigration in any real sense. They just want to work, support their families, and live in a safe, orderly communities. If anything, Japan is actually trying harder than before to bring in highly skilled foreign talent, even if implementation hasn't caught up with ambition just yet. The true challenge for Japan now is balancing those open doors with social harmony, making sure both tourism and global talent contribute to, rather than disrupt, the national values and sense of community spirit that give Japan its distinctive, universally admired character. If you found this video insightful, be sure to subscribe to Asian Boss and share it with your friends and colleagues who might be interested in Japan. Look, I have to keep saying this every single time, but we're still a very small team, and while we do our best to research every single topic thoroughly, we might not always get everything right. But please know it's never intentional. We are not a political channel. I like to think our audience is mostly made up of intellectually curious business leaders and professionals who want to be better informed about Asia, the world's biggest market. We are really hoping to cover more business and tech topics going forward, and we'll keep delivering deep, authentic perspectives in ways only Asian Boss can. At this point, it feels like we are truly starting to challenge mainstream news outlets in terms of quality, reach, and distribution. at least when it comes to Asia-related insights. And that wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you, and let's keep growing this thing together. Hopefully, we can bring you more useful information and insights from Asia more often. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.